My previous life, right through college, I was an entrepreneur. And so I usually, depending upon the audience, I'll make an introduction of myself and say, succinctly, I'm a serial entrepreneur and a recovering politician. Listen, Utah's been so retro, we've been hip for a long time, okay? She helped campaign like so many friends and family members would. Yeah, I mean, no elected person ever gets there on their own merit. The old moving network, I was like that old man. I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I thought, I'm going to quietly sit back. I'm going to attend these meetings. Yeah. And for the next year, I only missed one planning and zoning and one city council meeting because I wanted to find out how this creature worked when I didn't know how it worked, but I could tell I was governed by it. And I didn't like the rules of how me and my neighbors were being governed by it.
Welcome to the Good Government Show. I'm your host, Dave Martin. On this episode, I talk with Shawn Milnes of Utah, and I don't want to brag, but he's the Director of Economic Development, Quality Growth, and Intergovernmental Affairs for the Bear River Association of Governments, aka BRAG. See what I did there? BRAG, Bear River? Yeah, BRAG. Okay, so what does that all mean? As Shawn will explain, he wears at least two hats. One hat is representing elected officials in this region of Utah, and that's northern Utah. And by the way, Bear Lake is known as the Caribbean of the Rockies. I should check this out. The other hat is promoting this area to the business community, enticing them to move into the region. Shawn says he didn't set out to be a government official, but rather fell into it. And actually, he did what many government leaders have said they want people to do. He complained, then got involved. He saw a way to improve his community and got elected county commissioner at 32. A few re-elections, and then the appointment to his current position. From his perspective in government, but also looking back to what got him involved, which was being a critic of government, he sees both sides and works to bring helpful governments to the business community. Piece of cake. So, join me for a conversation with Shawn Milnes and listen to how he manages to promote both the business sector and government. That's coming up right after this. The Good Government Show is sponsored by Ourco. That means our community. Ourco has found a way to make government more effective. Ourco provides the OUR platform, and this is an app that blends in-person and digital interactions to connect people with their government, their county, their town, their state. The Ourco app transforms meaningful conversations into reliable data. They can turn results into projects and programs the community has essentially already approved. It's sort of like a flash poll by phone, but without the call and in real time and wherever community members are. Maybe they're at their house or their office or where they're out just talking about local issues. Maybe the choice is between putting in more local buses or expanding the bike lanes. Ourco can get you an answer immediately. With OUR, you can engage your citizens or any group, learn what they want, and build programs and policies that advance your county, your job creators, your constituents. So visit ourco.com, that's OURCO.com, and learn how they do it. And while you're there, book a demonstration. After you get done with this episode, hear more good government stories with our friends at How to Really Run a City. Former mayors Kasim Reed of Atlanta and Michael Nutter of Philadelphia, and their co-host, journalist and author Larry Platt, talk with guests and other mayors about how to really get stuff done in cities around the nation. Check them out where you're listening now or through their nonprofit news site, thephiladelphiacitizen.org/podcasts. Welcome to the Good Government Show. I have with me Shawn Milnes. And Shawn, you've got quite a title, and tell me what your title is and explain it.
Yeah, so my technical title is Director of Economic Development, Quality Growth, and Intergovernmental Affairs.
And who do you do that for?
The technical entity is called the Bear River Association of Governments, or BRAG for short.
BRAG,
we represent,
nice.
Yeah, I know. I love it because I'm in economic development, which is about sales, right?
Sure.
So I get to brag.
You get to brag about BRAG.
Yeah,
all right.
about
Sorry,
all the
did
industry.
I steal your thunder on that?
No.
Thank you.
I mean, it's very predictable. So,
sure,
no,
yes.
Yeah, love it.
And what government entity is this?
So it's a political subdivision of Utah, just like a school district.
What's a political subdivision?
Yeah, they're an entity that's written in state statute that the state legislature governs. So ultimately, cities, counties, school districts, or an AOG, an association of governments like BRAG is, we all derive our authority to work on behalf of citizens we serve from the state legislature. So we're basically a governmental entity that represents citizens within the area we serve.
And what brought you to this position, this role?
Yeah, thanks. My previous life, right through college, I was an entrepreneur. And so I usually, depending upon the audience, I'll make an introduction of myself and say, succinctly, I'm a serial entrepreneur and a recovering politician. I started my business during college and did that for about 25 years. I have that private sector experience and know what it's like for, a lot of folks in private sector to have the challenges of creating jobs and understanding, a different way to define ROI or return on investment, a very common term within private sector management. And then I fell into politics. I fell into civic engagement. It was not something I had really planned on, but my neighbors and I, from a residential standpoint, some lack of understanding and not knowing what I didn't know and why I didn't know it, for kind of my business ownership and how I looked at government and my relationship with it. It modified, and I got onto planning and zoning, then city council, then county commission, where ultimately the county commission was a full-time. So
you were elected county commissioner?
Yeah, and city council prior to that, and a number of different boards and committees, either within the county or governor appointed, Senate ratified.
What was your first election? When was your first race? How old were you?
I was 32.
Okay. Oh, a young guy.
Yeah. I mean, relative terms, yeah.
Sure. And what prompted you to run for office?
Ironically, David, something that is diametrically opposed to the position I have today, now having been in government for 20 years.
Okay.
A bunch of my neighbors and I were very unhappy with a political decision to allow zoning within proximity to our neighborhood. Long story short, it was about, that kind of housing that we didn't want, and we thought it didn't blend with our kind of housing. And some neighbors, we were somebody had kicked our anthill, and we were all coming out to see what the problem was. And we went to planning and zoning commission meeting, and we went to city council meeting, and we didn't like the response we got. And it was really the tone. Like, we just didn't know what we didn't know. I'd gone to college for business. Yeah. I was a business guy, and we just didn't know. And we didn't know the process. And, a term that I take for granted now, grandfathered, something was grandfathered in, means it may have changed, but because when X entity, whether business or nonprofit, when they started doing something that was permitted use. Now laws have changed or regulations have changed, but
we're still going to do it the old way. We don't care.
Yeah, because they're grandfathered in. They still legally can. And so they're like, well, we started playing this game when the rules were this way just because, new dealer came in, and they're like, well, the official rules of the game are now this. Government has a way of saying, well, you were grandfathered in. You've continued and perpetually been playing by the old rules. You get to persist as long as you don't cease operations for about a year, because there is that caveat that, hey, if you have ceased whatever that grandfathered provision is for a year or more, you can't just decide later that you want to still play by the old rules. No, now you need to come into conformity with the newer rules. Anyway, my neighbors and I, we were quite upset, and we didn't understand some of these terms, and this thing that caught our attention for some vacant lots in our neighborhood being utilized for a type of housing that we were not too keen on. We didn't like the answer we got from planning and zoning and city council. And unlike my neighbors, I was just mad enough that, like the old moving network, I was like that old man. I'm mad as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And I thought, I'm going to quietly sit back. I'm going to attend these meetings. Yeah. And for the next year, I only missed one planning and zoning and one city council meeting, because I wanted to find out how this creature worked when I didn't know how it worked, but I could tell I was governed by it. And I didn't like the rules of how me and my neighbors were being governed by it.
Well, so it sounds like you did exactly what many, many county commissioners and political leaders say to do is, if you don't like the way things are working, get involved.
Yep. I have a really great friend of mine who's in realty, and he coined this phrase, whether it was his or just, some modification of a previous one. The world belongs to those who show up. And, I've learned now, being a representative, right? Yeah. How true that is. And it's always a challenging balance when you're an elected official. Do you pay attention to those that showed up at the public meeting where it's on the record and it's quote unquote the only time that it counts, right? Yeah. Or can you also, and should you, when there aren't meeting minutes of Joe or Susie stopping you at the store, church, an athletic event for little Susie or Johnny, that you're taking them to, And they share their opinion with you there in a kind of unofficial capacity, but clearly it's because you're an elected official. They're sharing their opinion, but there's no meeting minutes of that, right? There's no recording that's up on a state website of how they spoke to you and shared their opinion. And so I always found that kind of a hard
And you can walk
balance.
away and either listen to it and take their advice, or walk away and go, nope.
Yeah, I can tell you, if you walk away from one of those, off-duty sort of moments in the community, any more than if you were to speak with disdain during a public meeting to somebody sharing their public comments, both are going to get you unelected.
Okay. All right. So tell me a little bit about this role with the BRAG, the Bear River Association of Governments. What is it? What does it do? And how does this provide good government?
Yeah. Well, what I love about it is it gets to take both the private sector and public sector experience of roughly 20 years each. And I look at it and, again, depending upon who I'm introducing myself to and their question like yours just was, so what does that mean? Like I do, I'm director of economic development and intergovernmental affairs. Okay, great. What does that mean? And it's kind of like a marriage counselor, right? So in the sense of economic development, and I'm going to kind of bifurcate this, David, I'm going to say economic development is one hat. Intergovernmental affairs is another hat. Maybe I'll just finish with the intergovernmental affairs. That's basically being a proxy for other government officials, right? So the electeds, let's say they're triple booked for an appointment and on their calendar. And there's one that they know they need to have a presence at. They need to have a message delivered in that context of that meeting, or they need to be able to get a read of the room, but they're not physically able to be there in the two other places they've got booked. They send somebody like me, right? Or they may give me a mission that says, hey, I've heard from Joe over here, this private business. Susie is the director of this other NGO. I need you to try to moderate or mitigate a challenge that these two organizations are not seeing eye to eye, because them getting along makes a difference to our community's, health and vibrancy, or success of X program.
So you're stepping in as an almost government mediator between two private entities that are trying to do something together, or
that's probably a good way to put the economic development side. I'll come to that here in a second.
Sorry.
But like if it's public sector to public sector, I would say that's kind of intergovernmental affairs, or one public sector entity to a private sector entity. That may be the intergovernmental affairs, right? It is definitely that.
But
mediation.
you're the intermediary between those.
Yeah, and you'll see these two hats worn by folks that are in economic development with some frequency.
Yeah,
because the mediation role is similar in philosophical approach. Now I'll get over to that economic development role. It's usually about business retention, keeping the businesses that you have in your community that are great employers. You want to keep them there because they give upward mobility and advancement opportunities to members of your community. And it's also outside sales, right? So as long as you're out there recruiting businesses to come to your region, your city, your county, whatever that jurisdiction is, you're in the sales job, right? And you're trying to say, hey, if you're a California business and you're located on the coast, but you're thinking about going inland, here's why you should choose one of the communities that I would represent. Here's why you should consider us on your short list.
Which is Northern Utah, right?
Yeah, I specifically serve Northern Utah. And so I get to mediate that conversation. And I say get to because I love what I do. I love what I do. And I feel like I'm good at it because I have that private sector and public sector experience. I know as a business owner what competition is really like. I know how onerous government regulations can and oftentimes are sometimes produced with the best of intentions, because I've been there, done that. I've been somebody who didn't know what I didn't know as a government policy maker with the best of intentions, but you don't know at the micro level how some of those policies you're creating, drafting, and passing can affect unintended consequences to a different segment of the market, right? And so my job is to help mediate those discussions so that they don't blow up. Sometimes developers can have a very adamant, persuasive, agitated way of speaking to government, which again, I can relate to based on how I got involved in public sector involvement. So I get it. And at the same time,
whoever is trying to build in your neighborhood.
Bingo.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I now have an appreciation after 20 years of, being in one appointed or elected role of one type or another on how challenging it is to try to craft good policy to move quickly enough that it's relevant at the time that you're discussing it for a reason. Yeah. Right. And at the same time, not have death by committee to the point it drags on so long you don't accomplish what it is you initiated that process for.
Well, that brings me to a question that I have. There is a segment of the population that would like to dismantle the government. Some completely, some little by little.
haven't you really just added a government layer that's maybe unnecessary?
I will qualified sort of response. Yes, because it depends on one's perspective.
Okay.
And if you have the perspective as one particular citizen does for one of the counties that I represent, she shows up to every county commission meeting. And she either comes to me after the meeting's officially been adjourned or goes to the commissioners after it's officially adjourned. She comments and opines beyond the public comment period, 3 minutes that's afforded in that official context, and she'll lobby her case. And she is certainly one of those folks that, as you just characterized, does not believe that Parks and Rec, IT, economic development, she doesn't believe that any of those should exist. And so there are definitely folks that feel that way.
No Parks and Rec?
I asked her one day when she told me that my job is just bloated government and that it shouldn't exist. And philosophically, David, I'll just be really blunt with you. In economic development, I don't wholly disagree with her. I don't wholly disagree with her. But that would be true if we had truly free markets, but we don't.
Yeah.
We have I believe we have very onerously created so many regulations that in some jurisdictions more than others, we micromanage what the private markets can do and did for 100 years before government, at the instituting of our American political system. You had largely free markets. It wasn't to say that you could do whatever you wanted to unfettered and didn't have consequences to bad business decisions, but we certainly had a lot fewer laws than we do today, right? Even among the 13 colonies. If you look at those 13 states today, you look at the laws that are on the books, quantifiably, they're going to have many more laws than they do. And you know what? Yeah, people passed away through bad business practices and unscrupulous capitalists. And I don't fault that there was a desire to react to those circumstances to try to prevent more harm to society and individuals. But you could, I'm not saying I do, I'm playing both sides of this coin here for conversational purposes, because this is how our political system should work. You could also argue that, we're saving lives and protecting the health, safety, and welfare of people by passing more laws. True to form. And that's true. And there are many attorneys that draft bills that love that they have a job because they get to be employed by the word or by the 6-minute increment to create very, lengthy laws. So, I'm not going to disrespect a person who believes in small, limited government differently than how I too believe in small, limited government.
You've got a Ukraine flag on your lapel of your suit. I understand for the little conversation we had before is your work in Bragg. I took you to Ukraine. What was that all about, and how was your Ukraine trip? Yeah,
that's a good question. So I got in late last night to this this place that you and I are meeting and having the interview. I got in very late last night at 11:30. It was 37 consecutive hours of travel time.
And just may I say, you look smart. Your suit is put together.
Well, thank you.
You look like you're wide awake. Well done.
Caffeine does miracles.
All right.
Thank you. I definitely got to play kind of a dual role, if you will.
Yeah.
Bragg, Bear River Association of Governments certainly, paid for my participation, but I sit as a volunteer as a co-chair to the Advanced Aviation Technology Committee within the Utah Association, the Utah Aerospace and Defense Association. So Utah Aerospace and Defense Association is about advocating for the aerospace and defense interests within Utah, which those two silos, as broadly as they can be defined, make up 20% of Utah's statewide economy.
Oh.
And this committee, the Advanced Aviation Technology Committee, is as much about composite materials that can make a conventional airplane fly better, more fuel efficiently, and carry passengers, or a modern warfighter. But it can also mean battery technology and sensory payloads on a drone, which is kind of where I got started 8 years ago down this path of advocacy for this space. But within the couple of counties, there's a few counties I work for, but in a couple of them, they have a concentrated interest in this space. And for reasons of advocating what those industry partners can provide, the situation in Ukraine right now, that was the primary focus of my advocacy work there. But it was also fact-finding. And the fact-finding went even better than I had expected, even by the briefings we had had for months prior to being in country. And I can tell you that I can now with a straight face go back to ag producers, the agricultural community, medical devices, and others, and even steel production, and say, I think that there's a great opportunity for you if you're interested in hearing what I have to bring back from this trip, and how you might be able to either inter-country to offer your products and services, or partner with a Ukrainian company to create a joint partnership, a joint corporate partnership, because no country wants a bunch of foreigners to come in and say, hey, our way's the best. It's the only way you should do it. And by the way, while we're selling you products and services, we're going to export that. We're going to export it back to our country.
Right.
It's about teaching them some self-sufficiency in a way that, here's a humbling, I had an epiphany one morning as I was getting ready while in country to go to the briefing we were going to have that morning.
Maybe it was just no sleep.
Maybe it was. It was definitely a deep philosophy. The whole trip was interesting.
I'm sure.
If it wasn't for the horrors that the frontline communities are facing from what I perceive to be an evil aggressor, I could use the word wonderful, because it was so informative and it was so eye-opening. But that seems like too cheery a word for some of the things that we witnessed and even experienced. There was one meeting we showed up to a regional governor and municipal leaders with. And as we arrived on site to get out to their public square to make our way into the building, the air raid sirens went off.
Ooh.
And we had to immediately, as SOP
Had you
standard
had any training, preparation for what to do in this case?
Yeah.
Okay.
Some of us, as part of the delegation, are more familiar with that than others. But
okay.
In other words, like it was all fine.
All right.
And a lot of it is precautionary. But because of known threats in the air, we went a short distance away and we went into a bomb shelter. Now, we perceived we were going to wait that out, and then we would meet with those that we were there and expected to meet with. But they knew that time was of the essence, and they have schedules to meet as well. After all, they're representing their communities, and as one might imagine,
they're a little busy.
Correct.
A few things on their plate.
So they met us, and we had a meeting tantamount to a public meeting that in every other instance was kind of a private meeting with a bunch of school-aged ballerinas who had been doing their ballet practice.
Okay.
Who rushed into the shelter as well.
All right.
Some moms and their young children who rushed in as well. And some other members of the community who rushed into that particular bomb shelter at that particular time as well. And they were very respectful and they were silent, and they listened to their government leaders and our delegation speak through translators to hold this meeting. Anyway, the epiphany, David, was this. As I was getting ready one morning before I headed down to the daily briefing and before the rest of our day's activities, I was thinking about, and nobody can convince me otherwise based on my experience for the last week and a half, they simply want the same thing we did at the beginning of our country. We once belonged to a much larger, proximate, very influential empire. So did they.
Right.
We believed we could have our own independence and we could do things similar to honor our tradition of the empire we used to be a part of. After all, we speak a common language, we have some common customs, but we are different. Yeah. And we want that independence. Much like the rite of passage that, many of us will go through as teenagers or early 20-somethings. You're still part of the family, but you're going to have your own independent life. Yeah. And here they were being told, no, you shall remain as one of us. And the epiphany continued where I was like, just like France, we don't think a lot like France today. But they came to us when we had our hand out and said, would you assist us in our independence? And they said, sure, here are some arms, here are some merchant ships, here are some guns, and here are some financial capital opportunities, some of it and just over, gift of money, and some of it low interest loans.
And do whatever you want with Lafayette, he's already there.
So with not wanting to go down the rabbit hole as much as I love history, so I'm hearing you.
All right, sorry.
I was thinking, no, I love that. But I probably, I respect that you probably have time limits to these podcasts. and that's all they're asking for too.
Yeah.
And just as our founding fathers experienced that they put their life, they put their fortunes, if they had one, because not all of them did. Some of them were gentlemen farmers, right?
Right.
They put that on the line to have their independence, and that's what these folks have done. And if you're a commander, or if you're a civil, leader, elected or appointed, whatever it may be, they have websites like we do.
Yeah.
That gives their adversaries a target to be able to say, who do we want to depose? Who do we want to go after? What kind of infrastructure? And David, as we spent some of our days going through country, we saw blown up bridges, like the equivalent of 5-lane highway bridges over a river blown up. Now, I also don't want to take myself down this rabbit hole. Again, I respect that this is a different kind of podcast.
Sure.
But we could talk about the wisdom in going after certain pieces of infrastructure and how it demoralizes a population and makes your invasion easier.
What's your big takeaway from your trip to Ukraine?
There is so much opportunity for us to partner with really great people.
Yeah.
There is so much opportunity, and I hope our nation's leaders and I hope the American people realize that, just like in 2014, if you ignore this annexation, it will just continue, because it went unchecked in 2014.
Crimea.
Thank you. Yep, exactly. And now with 4 other quote unquote breakaway, but they're not really breakaway, republics that have been annexed.
Yep.
You've got the Balkan nations that are looking at this going, woo. Because Ukraine is the largest.
Then it's Lithuania, and then it's Estonia, and then it's Latvia, and then
Moldova, Romania. I mean,
Kazakhstan.
You couldn't be more right. Like that. That's exactly why they're so supportive. That is exactly why they stepped up even quicker and with more proportionate to their GDP.
Yep.
They stepped up with more support than America has, because they know, they live it. They're sharing a border with that empire that wants them back. Because the ruler they have right now is not a Gorbachev.
No.
Gorbachev wouldn't have done this. Gorbachev would not have used the kind of excuses that Putin has masterfully used with propaganda to initiate this invasion. But anyway, so I'm getting down kind of a dark path, but it comes down to good government, and where if you don't do it right, this is the kind of government you could have in all sincerity, right? So the takeaway is this. They're beautiful people. They thanked us right and left as though this small delegation from one of the 50 states was somehow representative of all the American people. And they said, thank you, repeatedly. David, we would show up in some of these battered communities, apartment buildings bombed with no military assets for a mile around.
Yeah.
And the Russians do not have that piss poor of targeting and acquisition technology.
So
fair.
Yeah.
Okay. So
right.
One can read into what the purpose of that kind of barbarism, in my view, was all about. And we'd come to these communities, and they opened up their town hall and their homes with a meal and with trinket gifts. And you're thinking to yourself, you have a much humbler experience than what I know in America back home. And yet you are so gracious. But just like the French today, there are older generations that remember enough about Normandy and World War II.
Right.
They maintain entire cemeteries filled with American servicemen that went there to.
All right, I got to stop you, because I could start asking questions about this and we never get out of here.
Okay.
You are from Smithfield, Utah, where you were a county commissioner. Just briefly.
I was a county commissioner in Tooele County, a totally different county than where I worked today.
Sorry.
Yeah.
What's going on back there?
Which part? In Smithfield, aka Cache County?
Yes.
Or
let's start with Smithfield.
Well, good government.
We like that.
I mean, yeah, this is something I've said for years before I ever knew David or the Good Government Show. When people would ask, hey.
Now that you're a regular listener.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So it has a great pun now and is great passive advertisement. But yeah, I mean, good government. We were in the middle of municipal elections. We had 12 people running for 12 open city council seats. I love that.
Yep. Contested elections are always better.
As somebody who's run and won and lost, I can attest to that. Yeah, but better informed citizens make better informed decisions at the ballot box. And when you have 12, opportunities to select from, for 3 open spots, chances are good you're going to get a good caliber of person who's shown that they can think on their feet. I mean, campaigns are terrible. I got to be honest with you. I love not being an elected official anymore for that reason, because they're very stressful, and they're stressful on the whole household and your closest friends around you that support you and buttress you during campaign season.
I saw your wife walking around here earlier. Did she help out of the campaign? Was she knocking on doors with you?
Oh, absolutely, she did.
Oh, she did. Okay.
It's a rare treat. Normally, she wouldn't be here in this kind of a setting with me, but where I've been, out of country. This was just a rare opportunity where she'd come along. But that last session that I was in, it was right up her alley, given her day job.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, she helped campaign like so many friends and family members would. Yeah. I mean, no elected person ever gets there on their own merit.
Okay. So that was the easy part. Now we're going to get into the good government questionnaire. We're going to get to your personal philosophy of what government's all about. Here we go. So you work in what you said is a political subdivision in the Bear River Association of Governments, but you were a city council person and you also were a county commissioner. Define good government.
Good government is one that's responsive to the people that it serves and makes good long-term decisions, even at the expense of short-term re-election cycles.
How do you judge your success? First, as a county commissioner, how did you judge it? And now with the Bear River Association of Governments, how do you judge how do you know if you're doing a good job?
Well, certainly the amount of rancor in a community. If there isn't a lot, then you know that people are generally speaking happy. Right?
Okay.
That doesn't mean that there aren't one-off topics. There are one-off, circumstances going on where that particular county commission meeting or city council meeting isn't full with a bunch of people that want to offer their opinion. I'm not counting that as rancor. That's appropriate American-styled governance where, you work for the people have the opportunity to address their government and their representatives to any kind of redress of things where they think they're going wrong or to give input on the next piece of legislation that's about to be passed. So I think you can establish that a good government official is one who can moderate when there is a clash, though, of ideas. I have varying degrees of success or failure in that with different topics while I served as an elected official.
How do you know if you're doing good? You said you have varying success. How do you judge whether you're being successful?
Some of it can be as unofficial. David is looking at a Facebook thread to see what people opine, about the performance.
That can turn ugly.
It can, and it oftentimes did on a couple of key topics.
Okay.
But I also think that you have to look at it with the long arch of time. And I think that it's very tempting for politicians thinking about their next re-election cycle to really get very little done. I've heard one locally refer to it locally to the state of Utah, not local necessarily for one of the counties I work for, that has what's called strategic avoidance in that trying to avoid and dodge the sticky situations and to let somebody else kind of lead out. And then they kind of swoop in at the end and take credit for it. I personally don't respect those kind of folks. They may be a leader in polls, but that doesn't mean they're actually a leader in action. At the same time, the way I governed other folks, that may not be their thing, but I love taking the bull by the horns and saying, while everybody else is being dodgy and they're sitting back to see how other pundits let this shake out, I'll be one of those expendable pundits in order to make sure that we get somewhere with this topic. I think a definition I hear of compromise sometimes is when all sides are not 100% happy, you've probably achieved compromise because there's enough there that every party has something that's made them happy, but enough that they had to sacrifice to make another party happy where they're not totally unhappy either.
As a non-elected official, as a non-elected government official, how can people hold you accountable if they think you're not doing a good job?
That's a great question. So the multiple counties I work for, I have a boss at that Association of Governments, that AOG, and he has a boss through the governing board. The governing board is made up 100% of elected officials, both at municipal and county level. And so, I actually work directly for them. This boss that I have at the AOG, he's a great guy. We get along well. He's a veteran and has long history here at this organization. Like, he's just a good guy, and our personalities gel. But he's told me, hey, you need to make these counties happy for the work that it is you're performing on their behalf.
Okay.
And so he's like, I know you're going to be engaged with the Board of Governors is what we have. And, having been one of those, I get it. My job is to not embarrass them. My job is to make sure that I've vetted controversial topics, to represent them and their community's interests through them. So, I think it's like any good government. It's going to be based upon communication, which is a good, healthy amount of listening, as well as expressing what it is that you're seeing and becoming educated about to those that are using you as their proxy for that education process, right? And so I know I haven't lived your life, David, but I bet I can learn a lot of things from experiences you've had that I might want to also enjoy. And you're like, well, actually be prepared. Your eyes should be open for that kind of experience like this. This was something surprising I learned. And so I love having discussions with people to find out, what it is are their pain points. Like, this is really my job, whether it's intergovernmental affairs or economic development. What are your pain points, and what does a desirable objective, for an outcome look like? And then meeting with the other side of an equation. And oftentimes there's actually more than just two sides, and saying, okay, ditto, what are your objectives? What would you consider a success? And what are your pain points? And trying to find where there's enough overlap, like a Venn diagram, to say, okay, that's the sweet spot. That's where we can start. We can start on at least accomplishing incrementally the parts where we all agree that that's a good direction. Start there, build trust, and you can go incrementally towards the more challenging stuff. As the rapport is built up, the trust is earned, the parties are like, okay, I'll trust you. I'm a little nervous about going that direction, and that doesn't necessarily get me where I thought I originally wanted to go, but you can get there.
You got into this because you did exactly what other government leaders have told me they should do. If people feel like they're not getting good government, they always are told to get involved. You did that. What advice would you give someone else?
Absolutely that. Like, I was trained in business, and I was a business owner. I was an entrepreneur. That's what my experience had been. And I thought of life and what my government should be doing for me much the same way that I was thinking about it in the private sector. What I can tell you now of 20 years in different capacities in the public sector is ROI, return on investment, is measured differently.
Would you tell people to run for elective office, or would you just tell them, pay attention? Pay attention
and give input.
Okay.
There are very few people who give input. Like, I'm old enough that, one of the jobs I had out of school and before I got into, or as I was in college, was actually dressing up nicely, being at a large metropolitan styled mall with a clipboard and asking people market questions.
Okay.
Like, I was one of those folks that would ask you, so blind taste test here, which cup of cereal that looks strikingly similar, which one do you prefer the taste of? And like, you make better decisions with better data, right?
Okay, right.
Your politicians and your community and civic leaders will make better decisions with more data. If you're not offering your advice, you are beholden to the decisions your elected leaders or appointed that your civic leaders are going to make without your input. So if you have a proxy as a citizen of your city, your town, your school board, whatever it is, if you have a proxy and it's your neighbor who's more engaged than you are, great, but you've acquiesced a certain amount of your voice to their interpretation of what you want. If you want to really affect good government, you don't have to run. You don't have to put yourself out there in that same way. I'm not going to discourage somebody from doing it,
right?
Because you'll gain an appreciation for what your leaders go through. But just show up, and that can be either with a voice, phone call. It can be an email. It can be respectfully giving your advice on a Facebook page that your elected officials are paying attention to and garnering information from. But just participate, give some information.
You have a unique perspective in that you have been both an elected official and now a government appointed official. What would you like people to know about how government works?
I have rarely encountered somebody that really has malintent for why they're involved. I was very cynical when I got involved, again, kind of by mistake, on how I got involved with the public sector. And some of those stereotypes, I will tell you, I feel like they've been validated over 20 years. Like, the public sector doesn't really know. Like, somebody who's only been in the public sector their whole life, they don't really know what it's like to be in a competitive market like the private sector does.
Yeah.
At the same time, I have gotten my butt kicked, and God, our Creator, has given me plenty of very patient learning opportunities where I think now the exact opposite of some very ignorant views that I had. It doesn't mean, by the way, I think I've got it all figured out. I think he operates in a much longer, arc of time. And he's like, listen, young man, I've only given you a few lessons right now. You're still about to get your world turned upside down.
Yeah.
But it's just like, get involved, be patient. I don't remember.
Patient.
Yeah. Be patient and work with others. I have a couple of things that aren't going to translate well in an audio podcast, but I've got a couple of visuals that I save in my phone in my favorites photo album. And one, think of it like a soup can.
Yeah.
Okay. And the backdrop behind the soup can that's kind of floating in space is as if that can is in the inside of a square cube. Okay.
Yeah.
You have two light sources. One is blue, one is orange.
Okay.
And they are shining their light at 90-degree offsets on this can, this cylindrical shape. The one is casting on the backdrop of the inside of a cube a circle because that light is orange. It's at the bottom side of the can that's turned on its side. and what you see is a shadow reflected on that face behind the can.
I have no idea where you're going with this. Go ahead.
Okay. The other
Go ahead.
The other one is a blue light shining on the side of the can, and the backdrop of the inside of a cube on the other side of that is a rectangle because it's the lengthwise side of the can.
Right.
Both are true. The shadow that reflects behind this object that's floating and the light and the backdrop behind it, they're both true. One's a circle and one's a rectangle. They're both true. Mm-hmm. But if you're somebody that's looking at only the shadow and doesn't see the object through which the light has shone, you're saying, my friend, I know you're trying to describe this principle as a rectangle, but that's not my reality. My reality is it's a circle. And likewise, the opposite person is saying, that's not at all what I see, and that's not the truth. And the truth is that it's much more detailed and obscure. Like the truth is step away from it, and there are multiple perspectives, and
now it's all to make sense. Okay.
The object is the truth, but what you're seeing is true. And you think that because that's all you see, you don't see the other person's perspective because they've lived a different experience. They've arrived at this point in time, and they're going to advise this city council or this county commission or this, federal delegation member from your Senate or, congressional member. They're going to say, whoa, this other way is wrong. And I'm here to tell you, part of the reason where I got my butt kicked on some of these things as an elected official is realizing it's possible for there to be more one way to look at this. Isn't
there an old story, 10 blind men, stand next to an elephant and they each describe the elephant? Yeah. You're kind of talking about the same thing.
Yes.
You got to step back and open your eyes. Who's your political hero?
Oh, there's too many because they're all contextual. It just depends.
Who inspires you?
General George Washington. I will tell you that as somebody who stepped away when his ego could have been stroked just the right way and been made to be king
forever, right?
For him to have stepped away from that, I will tell you that
was unprecedented in the history of the world at that point.
Absolutely,
yes.
And it really was a step of faith. And some days I'm a little cynical, and I think we've thrown away this experiment on, like when we can't figure out a Speaker of the House for as long as we recently did.
Yeah.
Or just atrocious the way that we speak to one another, right? And then there are other days where I'm absolutely inspired that 250 years plus later, we're still around, right? And unfortunately, countries like Ukraine have to worry about the bully next door, and we don't have that problem. Like we don't right now. It doesn't mean that 250 years from now we're not in a different position geopolitically, but today we're pretty darn safe and secure. And he and founding fathers kind of kicked that off. They had strife, and sometimes we gloss over that, but I think he was a pretty wise man.
When you were growing up, did you want to be president of the United States or general or senator or any of that?
Nope,
were you president of your student council?
Well, okay, that one, by the time I got into college, I'd actually asked to be that, and that's not how that went. I didn't even come close. But but no, I didn't really have those visions. As a matter of fact, those little like aptitude tests that we all take when we're in grade school, mine said that I would be pretty good at being either a forest ranger, an artist of like a visual artist, painting, that sort of thing, or some other things where I didn't come close as any point in my adulthood and career. But what I went to college for, David, was to become the administrator. I wanted to found and then become an administrator of a private secondary school, grades 7 through 12. I'd moved around a lot, raised by a single mom, and I just felt like the public education system hadn't done me right. It either advanced me through some courses where I was like, wow, I just barely passed that by the skin of my teeth and didn't totally comprehend it, but it was good enough for social progression. And then there were other ones where I was
that was me
the
in
kid. That was me in some of the advanced maths.
All right.
And then there was science and language where I was bored. I got the lesson the first time he told me, teacher, you don't need to keep beating this dead horse. And so I became the talkative kid at the back of class because I was bored. I've been there, done that. Like I felt like it didn't move fast enough in some ways, and it moved way too fast just to get through a syllabus and an agenda for the whole school year. And
but never
ways.
Sat back there dreaming of being president of the United States.
Nope. Okay. I thought, well, I'll just, I'll reinvent the education system in my neck of the woods somewhere.
All right. Okay. So I am coming to your town, to Smithfield, northern Utah. I've never been there before. What are we eating? Where are we going? What are we having? What's the regional dish that you love?
Funeral potatoes.
Excuse me?
Funeral potatoes, they're called.
Funeral
and
potatoes.
It is a Mormon or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints kind of phenomenon. It's really not that different when you think of the Midwest and their proclivity towards casseroles that are very calorie laden.
Yes.
It's Utah's version of a good Midwestern casserole.
What's in it?
It's potatoes, either a gratin style, kind of like thin slices, or a very popular way is just take your regular hash browns you're going to get at the store.
Yeah.
You overload it with cheese, which this body has been built by an unhealthy portion of dairy products. And we're really good at that in northern Utah, by the way.
Okay.
One of the gifts that I would give as we went places in Ukraine was a pair of socks with the branding of Logan, Utah, one of the cities within one of the counties I work for, and a big old cow, like a good milk producing cow.
All right.
Anyway, so you overload it with cheese, an unhealthy
Right.
portion thereof, some cream of mushroom soup, and you're all layering this in a Pyrex kind of baking pan, and you put it in the oven. And some folks will add for some crunch factor on top some corn flakes. Others have like their own like little secret ingredient that they'll put in. But funeral potatoes.
Funeral potatoes.
Yeah, that's what they're called.
All right. Anything else that?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of great things.
Like what?
Well, Jello's kind of a thing in Utah.
Jello.
Jello. It's just kind of what you do. Jello casserole of some
Okay.
sort.
I thought those were like 69. No.
Listen, Utah's been so retro. We've been hip for a long time. Okay, you know how everything comes back.
All right.
Yeah. So
the Jello mold is still alive and well in northern Utah.
well, yes, yeah. I mean, tongue in cheek, yes.
Okay. All right.
There's a lot of great dishes and there's a lot of great places, but at the risk of leaving somebody out and one of my 15 bosses hearing that I left, something out in their community, I'm just going to take that safe bet of funeral potatoes.
All right. Okay. So we are the Good Government Show. We always like to bring it back to good government. Tell me about a good government project you're involved in or have recently been involved in.
Well, there's a number of them. In economic development circles, like it's all about business retention and attraction. So there's a number of great businesses that we're helping to expand. Our unemployment rate has been incredibly low for a sustained period of time, even before the pandemic, but worse since the pandemic. So if you're looking for good job opportunities or you're a great entrepreneur in the ag, manufacturing, satellites up in the space kind of satellites, design, production.
Bit of a commercial here. That's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you're asking me what I'm involved in.
I did.
I'm about business retention and attraction, right?
Okay, sure.
Like we would love to bring you to northern Utah, where there's a high quality of life, a wholesome way to raise your family, and plenty of job opportunities.
All right. Shawn Milnes, it has been a pleasure speaking with you and chatting with you. An incredible experience you had over in Ukraine, and thanks for staying up and talking to us.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
We are recording this in early November of 2023, and hopefully things will improve as a result of your trip to Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. Here's to hoping. Yep.
There you go. Thanks for being here. Thank you very much.
Thanks, David. I enjoy your program. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Where do you get your news from? Where do you get your state and local government news from? Because that's getting harder and harder. And it's essential to stay updated with your community. And it's becoming increasingly important to know what's going on in other cities and states, because they're likely facing challenges that you're grappling with too, or you're going to face eventually. That's why we'd like to welcome our new partner, Route 50, to the show. Route 50 is a leading online publication covering state and local governments across the country. They've written about states protecting themselves against the rise in cyber attacks, counties using AI to better support citizen services, local responses to crumbling infrastructure and extreme weather, and much, much more. There's a lot there. It's a one-stop shop for issues affecting state and local governments and their residents. That's you. That's all of us. Do yourself a favor and go to route50.com to see the topics and solutions they cover and learn what other people in government are doing. They also deliver a daily newsletter called Route 50 Today. I see it in my inbox every morning. I check it out, and you should too. Thanks again, Route 50. We're excited to have you on board and being a partner here at the Good Government Show. What is it that county government does? That's the question county commissioners get asked the most, and the simple answer is everything. On the Good Government Show, we're so lucky to have talked with so many county commissioners and other county officials that have shown us how effective county government is. County government dates back to, get this, 1634, making it one of the oldest forms of government in the United States. Think about it. Roads, highways, hospitals, schools, recycling, law enforcement, water, sewers, and most of the county, those services are maintained by the county. That's county government. The National Association of Counties represents all 3,069 counties across the USA. NACo helps county government work better together through things like sharing best practices. When county government works well, that's just good government. I like what his friends said to him early in his career. The world belongs to those who show up. And that follows the old adage, 90% of success is showing up. And here's something I learned about the Bear Lake region of Utah. This area is famous for its raspberry shakes. And that's enough to get me to go on a hike in the mountains. And I like that he said, in government, you can't have death by committee, because that sure is a good government killer. Well, good to hear there's a good government agency in Utah designed to help people and listen to people. That's good government in action, and Shawn sounds like the right guy to lead it. Well, that's our show. Thanks for listening. Please like us and share us with your friends and review us right here where you're listening. And check out our website, goodgovernmentshow.com, for extras. Join us again for another episode right here. I'm Dave Martin, and this is The Good Government Show. The Good Government Show is a Valley Park production. Jim Ludlow, Dave Martin, that's me, and David Snyder are the executive producers. Our show is edited and produced by Jason Stershic. Please subscribe, then share us, and like us and review us. That's the best way to make sure we're able to keep telling these stories of our government working for all of us. Then listen to the next episode of The Good Government Show.